Welcome to NTV. This is a debate and a discussion we are going to have on the budget that is due tomorrow. The good thing that Uganda has done, there are no secrets about the budget, so we can literally discuss the budget before. It's not like the 80s where the budget you wouldn't even know what was going to come until they read the new price for sugar. So we are happy that you're joining us at NTV, broadcasting live from the Serena Conference Center and Complex. We're going to be having quite a good, candid conversation and putting this budget into context, but also discuss quite a number of things. Fred Muhumza is my name, and with quite a good panel of people that we're going to be having this discussion with. I will begin on my extreme right, Dr. Patrick Birungi, who is the CEO or executive or main technical person at the Uganda Development Corporation. He will be telling us some issues to do with implementation now that the budget is going to be read tomorrow, but it doesn't begin to work tomorrow. The budget begins to work on the 1st of July. So we still have some room. And I also want to recognize Mr. Julius Mukunda from the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, who are also the sponsors of this conversation. Thank you so much, Julius, and welcome.
Thank you.
You'll also have your slot to greet the viewers so that they know you actually have a voice. They will want to hear that voice from you. I have Patronella Namubiru. She will also be coming to speak to you, coming in from Deloitte, who are some of our content partners, and we'll be discussing, as we've said, the budget. We really want to not to be surprised by some of the things that have surprised us in town. Crossing over to my, the only person on my left is Mabel Ndaula, who will be giving us a presentation on putting the budget really into context. What do they see from where they are coming from? What should you be looking forward to? What should you be trying to watch? Now, I have some people in the audience, social distancing, so we couldn't invite as many of you. But I do have people in my audience. At least I wanted to have people to look at in front of me, not just the cameras. So thank you, NTV, for making sure some people are in the house. Everest Kayondo doesn't require introduction. If you have been in Kampala, they began Kasita thinking it was a Kampala affair. It became a Ugandan affair. It is now a regional business. So you all know about Kasita is no longer Kampala City Traders Association. It's actually an ESC business. And I have Bubeika Mayanja, an old friend of mine. We met in the dungeons of economics and business. You're welcome, Bubeika. He will be also giving us a perspective from where he sits, from where he stays. People have come out of the lockdown. I have Norbert Kagoro. I think I need to get that one right. But he's of age. He will tell us where I've gone wrong, and I will owe him a sweet. I can't owe him a chicken. Sorry, Corona has eaten into my chicken. It's always ladies first. It's always ladies first. So I'm going to invite Mabel Ndaula to put this conversation and the budget that is coming due tomorrow into context. Just remember, we are not going to read the minister's budget. This is putting it into context. So don't say because you are on NTV today, you will sleep tomorrow and miss out the budget. Please, my elder, Honorable Matia Kasaija, needs your ear for you to really listen to what he's going to be saying in this COVID economy that we have. Corona is with us. We already have quite a large number of people. The budget will be speaking to some of those events, but you too, your budget has been at least affected. I want to believe you have bought that mask. So my mask is with me here. I'll put it on. I wasn't breathing very well. It wasn't making me very convenient. But I've had to learn what masks look like, sanitizers. Mabel, what is in the budget? Are we going to get the free masks? This is not to preempt your conversation, please. You have the floor.
Thank you for that. I'll start by first wishing everybody a good afternoon, to the viewers and to everybody on the floor. The presentation I'm making is just a precursor to a more detailed debate on the floor. We're looking at putting the 2020-2021 budget into perspective, given what's going on around us. Looking at past economics and trends, and also putting into perspective the lens that we are now dealing in very fluid, very extraordinary times. So the title of my presentation aptly notes that we are dealing in we have to be resilient during these extraordinary times. And so just to put into context, no government is taking this for granted, obviously, and it's going to be a very uphill task for all governments in the world. Uganda is no exclusion. And so how do you budget in a time when you don't really know what's going to happen 3 to 6 months from now? You're just guessing. You're playing a guessing game. And at the same time, you have pressures from the citizens, pressures from your stakeholders who are asking you to address all sorts of asks. And you have to address that while not really knowing what's coming for you. So what's really the challenge the governments are facing across the world? They're facing the challenge of having been hit by a disease that nobody really knows how to treat just yet. It's estimated by WHO, World Health Organization, that they will be able to get a vaccine maybe in the next 12 to 18 months. Who knows? Maybe Uganda will get it. But for governments sitting where they are, dealing with the disease, there's so many other opportunities for them to address what's happening. So a government, to manage through this crisis, has to look at 3 key drivers. The slide you see is really just a framework that Deloitte has developed to guide governments through the thought process on coordinating and managing moving parts and trying to govern a country. So governments have to balance actions to limit the disease, the spread of the disease, whilst at the same time making sure that there's no hit on economic impact, at least limited impacts on the economy. So we've had the lockdown, we've had the easing, but we can already see that the economy is getting impacted. Now, the government has to look at that lens, but they also have to look at the lens where you look at providing relief for individuals. So everybody sitting across the country in their different levels, from community level up to government employees, all these individuals are going through some form of stress due to the COVID impact. The government has to deal with that. They also have to deal with the businesses and the sector impacts. The third lens the government needs to look at is how to reopen the economy for future sustainability, to get back to almost normal, what we call new normal. Nobody really knows what that is, and no one has the answers. So this framework is really just trying to advise that all 3 levers need to be looked at. You can't look at one and ignore the other. But now the predicament that governments find themselves in, they are being squeezed from multiple directions. There's a small diagram at the bottom of that slide you can see that's showing you really where our governments are. There's the government in the middle with the resource base, and the resource base, as we all know, has its limitations. But they have to deal with a health sector which is at risk. They have to deal with high unemployment and social pressures, local government and high education fiscal crisis, revenue shortfalls, and I'll talk more about that from the URA perspective. You're looking at a potential economic shutdown or varying degrees of shutdown, concerned workforce, the productivity is dropping, and we'll talk more about that. They also have to deal with the reopening and how to phase it, and then the high demand, obviously, for restricted government support. This is no easy task by any means. But to get this really working, there's got to be a coordinated approach. So with all the hats that the government has to wear, how do they get this done? I will tell you first, I do not know the answer. I don't think Deloitte is going to give you the answer to how the government must get this done. But what we are looking at right now is there's certain key things that the government needs to make sure are working well. They need to look as a service provider, the hat as a service provider. They're providing utilities, they're providing services to the Ugandans. Some have access to finances, for instance, others don't. And because of the impacts on businesses, due to lockdown restrictions on international trade, there's been a substantial drop in activity. So what does the government need to do? So that's something they need to look at, and they already are looking at it. The employer, the government with the employer hat is employing all the civil servants who then provide services to the country. So that has to be sustained in one way or another. They also have to be a good communicator because if you're trying to do something and you're not telling people how it's working or what you're achieving in the right way, people assume what they don't know. So there needs to be a very good flow of communication from the government down to everybody, all the stakeholders. As an enforcer, we've seen a lot of good work coming out of the Ministry of Health on the restrictions to protect all the people regarding the exposure to the virus. And so enforcement of social distancing and all those things, that's excellent work from the government. How does the government now turn the eye to enforce the rest of the three drivers I'm talking about, the economic opening, the phased opening to make sure that businesses sustain, and then the key question, how to inject resources into the market so that the livelihood sustains at least to a certain level. And then lastly, obviously, they need to look at designing a recovery plan, which is going to be actionable and doable. The recovery plan needs to be phased. It needs to be realistic. But I don't think the government can do this on their own. This will require a whole transition and input from different sectors for the government to look at health, business, education, government sectors, and others. And so we are not giving the answers. This is just the precursor. But let's look a bit about, talk a bit about the economic implications, both coming from a pre-COVID perspective as well as what COVID has done as a result. There's a saying that the people that are getting the most heat by COVID are the ones who had pre-existing conditions. This came from the health perspective, but if you look at the economic perspective, it's really true for businesses. If you came from a point where you're heavy in debt, then when COVID hits you and you can no longer afford to generate the right revenues to pay your debt, you will get hit harder than somebody who had less debt, or even if they had debt, had reserves. So pre-existing conditions, both in economy and in health, will have different impacts on a business, on an individual's life, as well as the economy in general. So let's look at what's going on in the economy globally. Before I start looking at data, I just want to note that we've looked at different data points. The International Monetary Fund has provided some macros and has looked at different countries. We have data that continues to be provided by the Ministry of Finance, by Bank of Uganda, and several others, the EPRC, Makere, and others. So globally, what's going on? We know that the numbers are over 7 million infections right now. There's been lockdowns across the world, which are now starting to ease. But what does that mean in terms of the growth domestic product? The GDP is estimated to drop in almost all continents in the world. Globally, East Asia and Pacific are the only ones who are reporting as a continent that they will see some scant growth, 0.5%. All the rest are looking at contracting. South Asia is contracting by 2.7%, estimated. Sub-Saharan Africa expects a 2.8 contraction, and this varies from different countries. Middle East and North Africa will drop by 4.2% growth. Europe and East Asia, 4.7, and Latin America, 7.2. So inevitably, this just means there's a downturn. We're being hit by a global recession. And this is actually said to be worse than the financial recession that hit the world back in 2008. We may not have felt the impacts directly, immediately in Uganda, but those effects are now multiplied. So these downtowns, what's the impact? It's expected, obviously, that all the hard work in development goals that has been put in, a lot of it is going to reverse, and you're going to see a lot of people slipping back into extreme poverty. That's the macro. What does this mean in Uganda? What's the data telling us? There are certain indicators that sort of guide you regarding trends in economy and help you with planning. Let's look at inflation. Pre-COVID inflation was at about 2.8%, and it's expected post-COVID to rise to about 3.7% in 2020. Export revenues are expected to decline by 34% because of the lockdowns and the travel restrictions. Import value is expected to decline by 19% as well. Foreign exchange reserves, pre-COVID were estimated at 4.2 months worth of reserves. Right now, the estimate is about 3.5 months worth of reserves. A lot of this is affected also by the drop in funds, revenues being sent back to Uganda from abroad. And if you look at the current account deficit, pre-COVID, the estimate was 7.4% of GDP in 2019. Right now, the current account deficit is estimated around 8.1%. So all your macros are telling a story. There's obviously a decline. So in lay terms, what does this mean? There's impact on different angles. 5 key impacts that anyone should understand is there's an increase in the number of people slipping into poverty. This is not news. This is something that has been reported constantly. But the evidence in the numbers is showing. Poverty is expected, there's an increase expected of about 2.6 million people to drop back into poverty. This is an estimate from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. And this is an increase from 10 million back in 2017. If you look at deterioration of the current balance account, it's affected severely by the trade, the cross-border trade. But this comes and affects workers that have anything to do with the supply chain. There's heightened fiscal pressure, increased demand on government finances, obviously, because they have to deal with, number one, the response. They had to deal with the response. On the plus side, there's been a lot of support from various stakeholders to support the response as well. But one wonders, is that going to be enough going into the FY 2021 budget? There's domestic revenue shortfall, as I mentioned, and a decline in economic growth. So for Uganda, the economic growth is expected to decline from what was previously anticipated to be 6.8%. The data varies, I will say, depending on how recent it has been done. So I think rather than focus on what the data point is, the trend is evident. Let's look at some of the key sectors in Uganda. There's some key sectors. All sectors are going to be are likely to feel the heat, whether you're in agriculture or you're in financial services or others. But we've just highlighted 4 key sectors to give you a sense of what's happening in these key sectors, which actually have contributed a lot of GDP into the Ugandan economy. Agriculture, for one, which contributes about 22%, thereabout, and hires and is the biggest employer of Ugandans, about 70%, is already seeing a downward growth. Agriculture across the board is expected to be hit the least from all the data points you will look at. But it doesn't mean that they are immune. It will hit them. So because of reduced prices for some of our cash crops like coffee and tea, definitely that has a ripple down effect on revenue. And then there's trade restrictions due to flights. Subsectors like horticulture, floriculture are feeling the heat in Uganda as well as other parts of the world. When you look at tourism and hospitality, which provided about 7.7% of GDP and employs close to 700,000 people, what's happening there? It's really sad what's happening to the tourism and aviation industry. This is one of the sectors that is considered to be vulnerable. And in fact, because it's not, typically when you have money in your pocket, by the time you go to a hotel to have a meal, you're doing this because you're trying to achieve happiness or something. It's not an essential. You can have that meal at home. You can cook posho and beans, right? So now when you're stressed, when you don't have enough money, those are the vulnerable economies. Those are the ones that get hit first. So hotels are already reporting, this is in Uganda, occupancy drops of average of from 80% occupancy, this is the big hotels before COVID, down to 20% expected in 2020, and it could go even lower. Obviously, there's an opportunity for domestic tourism And I think, it's upon us to get creative here, but the data tells the story. It's really a big hit. If you look at the civil aviation sector, there's expected to be about $6 billion loss in that sector in Africa. And so what does that mean to our local airline, for instance? So those are questions that need to be answered. Manufacturing and infrastructure, also a big segment of the economy. There's a slowdown in growth, obviously. The supply chains are affected. And where previously manufacturers could access raw materials outside the country, it's no longer the case. On the plus side, like the president keeps saying, obviously domestic import substitution is an opportunity for Uganda in the manufacturing sector. We've seen the switch to making PPEs and sanitizers and things. So whilst there's a drop, there's also opportunity on the plus side for all sectors. And then looking at trade, where our small and mid-sized enterprises tend to play, the wholesale, the retail trade subsector, it's also a large contributor to the economic revenues. About 13% of 13% of GDP comes from that segment. That they're also heavily affected by the supply chain disruptions. So where they would get goods from countries like China, now they have to look for alternatives, and sometimes this could be more expensive. And so obviously that hits home. The sector obviously is also affected by the lockdown, which extended, and now there's access, but we're not there yet. The supply chain still needs to be connected. Let's look at the impact on the workforce. As you can see, they're all interrelated. So regarding the workforce, the demand for business has dropped. When demand for your business drops, inevitably you need to look at managing your cost line. Your cost line is heavily hit by labor costs. But at the same time, you need the labor to do the work. So it's a really interesting situation that the country has to deal with. But business is reported to be severely declining. In agriculture, this is from a report by the Economic Policy Research Center, which was released in May 2020. 71% of the demand in agriculture is said to have dropped. 47% in manufacturing of demand has dropped. 49% in service industry has dropped. Now, what does this mean? Companies need to start thinking of either laying off people. They need to look at salary reductions. And some of them are trying to obviously keep the productive workforce active. But, when you're pushed into a corner, you just have to act on it. So what are we seeing? From this report, it's reported that there's a reduction in workforce by businesses in these three segments of more than 25%. In agriculture, over 80% of the agribusinesses have reduced their workforce by up to 25% or more. In the manufacturing industry, over 70% have reduced their workforce by 25% or more. And in the service sector, about 53 upwards have reduced their workforce. Regarding salary reduction, which means somebody still has a job but it's reduced, only 38% reported changing salaries for their employees. There's a bit of positivity there, and we really hope that that can go upwards instead of downwards. Of these 38% who've changed salary structures, only 11.5% of them reported reducing salaries more than 50% per individual's earnings. And 18% of these businesses have reported increased salaries. So 38% are reporting drop, 18 are saying there's increased salaries. So it's a mixed bag, but because there's a huge unknown, and it's difficult really to do your business scenario planning without knowing which direction the economy is going, certain things need to be put in place to protect, to buffer the economy so that these figures don't go south. So let's look a bit at the revenues and what the government has collected, as well as some of the measures the government is putting in place. As I mentioned, all this is a precursor to the discussion today. about the FY 2021 budget. So regarding taxes and revenues, this diagram that you see is just in a nutshell telling you about how much revenue the government has collected in terms of domestic revenue mobilization and what was budgeted. The blue line you see on the top is what the projection was for FY 2019-2020. The bottom yellow line, which I hope you can see, is the actual collections. This is data from Ministry of Finance, published for the economic reports for the period July 2019 to April 2020. The entire year, there's been some challenges with collection. Some months looked like they were close to collecting what was budgeted. But the story towards March and April is where COVID came to play. The drop was really substantial. And so the pre-existing condition I'm talking about was already there. We were not really hitting the target in terms of domestic revenue mobilization. And now we have a huge drop, probably less of a drop in a country that was above budget collections. But we're not going to belabor that point. I'm sure the discussion will talk more about that. The government has not been sitting doing nothing, obviously. There's a couple of mitigating measures that have been put in place. So removal of tax on specified items, removal of excise duties, for instance, on some spirits made locally for raw materials, exemption on VAT or of supply of specific medical goods. You look at deferral of payments of taxes, where the URA is allowing individuals to defer the deadline, defer the tax return date, and also pay as you earn, and then waiver of fines and interest on tax liabilities. If you had tax liabilities by the end of the financial year, which is 30 June 2020, and then tax deductions are being allowed for charitable donations made to the government. It's not just the URA that has stimulated. There's other measures, as some of you may already know, expediting payment of outstanding VAT refunds, for instance. Others, like extensions on loan repayments that the Bank of Uganda has allowed for the commercial banks to implement, postponement of loan repayments. This gives you some relief, but also you remain with the debt. So the relief is good and obviously allows you to plan. The question is, as an individual, are you planning? It can't all be on the government. So there's a lot happening. And so, in a nutshell, with all this going on with COVID, the government now needs to think of how to reopen and get things kickstarting. Therein lies the big question about the budget. You have loss of livelihoods. You have unemployment, strained labor relations because of the layoffs and the reduced salaries. I'm very sure the lawyers are very busy right now. You have social effects, closure of schools, places of worship. This really affects people's lives, and there's probably psychological discussions that need to start happening. I don't know if somebody has done an analysis of the psychological impacts on individuals. We've seen a lot about the domestic violence. There's so much in the social space. And then the quality of education when there's no remote platforms. So many questions to ask. I won't belabor them. And before I hand back to the panel, just leaving that piece there, that the government has all these 5 hats to wear. The designer, the enforcer, the communicator, the employer, the service provider. And now we just, everybody's eyes are on the budget, and let's hear what the panel thinks. But the government has a high hill to climb, a steep hill to climb, and by all means, it cannot be just the government alone. I think everybody needs to play their part. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mabel, for this discussion, and I think you have ended at a good point. It's not just government, even you and me. Fortunately or unfortunately for us, we don't have a day when we read our personal budgets. It's every day. We adjust them every day. So while government reads its budget tomorrow, which will start in July, you know what your budget is like. You know how your budget has been hit as a person. And so you cannot just keep government at Yambe, the government should help us. We also need to help ourselves as we go through this story. It's not going to be business as usual, and we're going to be having a conversation here on how government can, we think, government should be able to do some things, but also how you can do your own things, because government will affect, whatever government does might affect your space directly or indirectly. And I'm going to get into my panel. We are all waiting for the vaccine, but the scientists are also saying, well, we don't know whether the vaccine will be a one-off jab. You get it in January, it lasts 10 years, or it's going to be this kind of thing, you get it monthly. We have no idea what vaccine is coming. Will it be affordable? Walking distances? Will it be a tablet I swallow? There is a lot of unknown, and I think that's what Mabel was trying to put out there, that nothing is known. We are walking into an uncertain world, and we have to continue walking into it. Mighty China has decided they're not going to put a growth figure for next year, because they don't know. Maybe that's a lesson we need to learn from them. Listen, the minister not tomorrow say the economy next year will grow by this much. We have no idea. Maybe there could be some lessons we'll be picking out. I want to begin with Julius Mukunda, you civil society budget advocacy group. You've been watching these budgets. You've been working with government quite many times, but also as civil society, you work with us.
Yes.
So if anybody can speak on the
core and everything, so that we have something to stock and have very good storage facilities, so that when these things come, we become like Singapore, where the Prime Minister said, our forefathers, were very, very clever that they saved for us. Mm-hmm. So that when this thing comes next time, we know that this year we are able to have very good storage of food. The other element I think we also need to grab as a country is the whole issue of who helps us to remain standing in these kind of situations. I think what the experience also is that the small and medium enterprises are very critical. And for me is, I will also be able to probably also talk to my colleague whom I'm sitting here next, is that at his UDC, he needs to look at those people. These big boys and girls in business, for them, this is not a big issue. They know where they will get capital from, whether from here or abroad. But a carpenter, a saloon, these saloons we have, these youth who have pools around, pool tables, these borders even that we are talking about, these market women and men who need just a capital of even not more than 1 million are the people who are actually helping us at this particular moment to be able to move on. And that if we invest in them, actually we can recover better than if we want to wait for these big boys and girls. And as such, my prayer is that these are the kind of things that government should be looking at them. Lastly, this period also has helped us to understand what we should leave behind as a country in terms of implementing. We know that it takes serious business to budget for a whole country. You take a whole year almost budgeting for it. But the budgeting of normal times is not the budgeting of situations like these ones. So it's time to look back in our budget, review it and say, I think if traveling abroad was good, this time it's not good. Let us hold on to it. When situations are better, when airports are open, we can move. Sensitizing people about land policy. Sensitizing people about so many other stuff. These are things we need to go back and say, okay, maybe this year it is something that we want to reduce on or leave all together, so that we can get resources to put in those areas that we want most to happen. But above all, I think, like she said, where will all this money come from? Because I think we talk about money, but where is money coming from? And as long as we don't do that, save from what we already have, we allocate strategic areas, then the damage will be much more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julius. The question is, where is the money going to come from? And as Mabel presented, I saw those gaps running away from each other towards the end, even at a faster rate. And this by December, the actuals were lower than the planned, but they were close to each other and still trying to walk into the same direction. But towards the end, by the time we go to March, to April, they were really running away from each other. But there is somebody who has already planned, Uganda Development Corporation, and it's not just their own plan, it's the expectation of the country of them. The burden on them is so huge. The expectations is so huge. Dr. Patrick Birungi, you sit there. What is it that you're worried of? What is it that concerns you? You know, every time you're walking to office, what is on that mind of yours as the new year opens in another 3 weeks' time?
Thank you very much. Is it a good evening or good afternoon, viewers?
That is English.
Before maybe I go into my concern, I will give this some build-up. The question is, what have we learned from this COVID pandemic? Maybe 3 or 4 points. One is that globalization is under attack. It exposed us as a country. We realized that we are heavily dependent on other economies. Our traders cannot continue doing business because the source of goods is no longer there, or the logistics do not allow anymore. Some factories were importing inputs, and this is how the global world was working anyway. But now they can no longer get the inputs, so they are kind of closing down. Even if we want them to work, they have no inputs because their systems were designed as such. Countries have become more inward-looking. Some countries have said no more exports of food, others have said no more exports of medicine and so on. So the globalization environment after COVID has to be managed in a very, very special way. So that is one thing that we've learned. But the lesson from there, from that observation, is that we need to develop our own production systems as a country. We need to develop that industrial base that is based on our raw materials or local supply of these raw materials. So this is becoming more and more clear as we go along. The second thing we've learned is that we need to rebalance the economy now. For the last few years, and I truly supported this and I continue to support it, we've invested in infrastructure development as a country. Now we need to make the infrastructure more productive, more useful to a Ugandan. And therefore we need to rebalance our spending, like Julius was saying, and say where are those areas where we can put resources and production and value addition should be that area. And I can tell you, moderator Dr. Fred, is that it's much cheaper to invest in those areas than investing in infrastructure.
Yeah. Yes.
If you said, I'm going to delay 2 roads for 2 years, you could save maybe more than $1 trillion.
Oh, yeah.
And redirect that money to more productive ventures. And it will have much bigger impact in the short run. We are not denying the importance of infrastructure, but trying to rebalance to address the current situation, the current needs or the current demand.
Yes.
If you gave that trillion to UDC, an average investment for a medium enterprise is maybe 20 billion. So you can see how many factories you would have adding value on cassava, on sugarcane, on maize, on whatever across the whole country in 1 trillion. It would make a different stage altogether. The third thing that we've learned is that we need to redefine our security. Our security system, as we know it today, is maybe basically the defense security system, protect the border, the people, and their property, and so on. But we need to include in our definition of security, food security. We need to include in our definition fuel security. We need to include essential medicine security. That's another thing that we've greatly learned from this period. That if we can expand and take care of this, then we would have a comprehensive security system that makes the country truly sovereign in its true definition. And the fourth lesson for me is that the state must play a strategic role in this recovery process. I agree, even from basic economic theory, the private sector is the best investor, and they know how to manage resources better. But where the private sector is weak, or where the private sector needs to be supported, the government must come in and play a role. Okay? I'll just, and that's where UDC particularly comes in, to play this role, to provide an opportunity of government working with the private sector so that we can produce in the economy. You ask yourselves, the boss of Kasita is here, but why is it that our private sector among the traders are investing more in real estate, in buildings? We call them the arcades, the malls, or whatever you want to call them. What are the available opportunities for them? Who has exposed them to alternative opportunities? How can we shift those resources away from these real estates to other productive ventures like industries? What are the mechanisms to attract these resources? How can they work with government so that, of course, sometimes they may not trust government, whether they will give you the money and you eat it or something. But we have to build a system where we can build trust and a relationship with the private sector to work with government. And also gone are the days when government used to give money free to the private sector. So this is where UDC comes in. We've planned, like you said, we can see some positive trends in terms of discussions on availing more resources in UDC, in UDB, and I think that's the right direction. But for it to be more impactful, we maybe need more resources than currently being discussed. But the direction is good, the mindset is good, there is positive discussion, and I expect more from the State of the Nation address last week, and also expect more in the budget to continue the same kind of discussion of empowering the private sector to do more in value addition and production in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patrick Birungi, giving us the insight. He's expecting more revenues. Our revenues are going down, but that's the way to go. You have to put in some money. You just have to be frugal and really very calculated to say, of these three things, which one do I need to do? Even if the one you want to do is not among the three. That now you must find a fourth one has put itself on your table, and not even going to lawyers will help you. So I don't want to get to Patronella now, no, because he directs both legal and tax, and I need to find time to see which side of that do I start her with, the legal or the tax. The director of legal and tax at Deloitte. We'll be right back. We're going to take a short break as I really think out my mind on how do I approach Patronella, the legal side, or the tax side? Because I really would love to sue one of those, the lawyers or the taxman. I have issues with both. We're going for a break. Welcome back. This is NTV broadcasting live from Serena Conference Center Complex. This conversation we are having, which is putting the budget that is going to be read tomorrow, the 2020-2021 budget is coming up tomorrow, and the Honorable Minister will be reading it on behalf of the President, because the Constitution is very clear. The President causes that budget to be read. But as we said, we have enough information to do a conversation on. And the information we really have is there is no sufficient information, because COVID has disrupted the global economy. People have put out a stimulus of 10% of the global gross domestic product, but they don't even know whether it will work or not work. These are proposals we are all literally groping in the dark. But that is the conversation we are really having on what is in it and what is not in it. And as we went into the break, as I've told you, I have a panel here. Julius Mukunda from CS Bag. I have Dr. Patrick Birungi from Uganda Development Corporation. I have Petronella from Deloitte. She's in charge, our director for tax and legal. Even as I bought some time to resolve myself, I have failed to see whether I begin from the tax side or the legal side. But she's of age, she will know where to start. Petronella, you have the floor. Is it tax, is it legal, or none of the above?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, viewers. I will start from the tax, and I'll start with a question that a lot of people have asked me since everything started. Where is the money going to come from? What is URA going to do? And the simple answer is URA can only work with what it has. So it has to be a partnership. So it's not, URA is a service provider, like a lot of government departments. It collects taxes. So there has to be a base against which it's collecting those taxes. There have been measures that have been put in place. Part of these are part of the stimulus package that the President announced. And the question for a lot of people is still, is that enough? Can that assist businesses in the recovery? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of people need to understand that because our economy is largely, supported by the SMEs, so the small and medium enterprises, and a lot of people live, it's hand to mouth. So we've had a discussion, a wide discussion, and I do echo a lot of the sentiments by the previous, speakers, both Julius and Patrick. We need to think about what needs to be done from a government side, but in collaboration with the private sector to move forward. So, and in my opinion, I think there are 3 pillars that could be considered. So if we're saying stimulation of the economy, so that's one of them, stimulation of the economy. But what does that actually mean? How do you stimulate the economy? Every country has felt the impacts of COVID, and that means we need to look inward. So a lot of the things we need to do have to come from, within Uganda, within Ugandans, from Ugandans. There is an OECD report that was issued in March. So OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and it indicates that there is going to be a reduction in foreign domestic investment into Africa. So what does that mean? So even when we talk about the multinationals, a lot of the multinationals are, have a foreign shareholder who would ordinarily put money into the business if it's not doing well. Those multinationals do not necessarily have the luxury of that investment anymore. So they too have to look inward and see how they rise up, how they build business in the current situation. So stimulate the economy probably is, you're looking at how do we generate spending in the economy? How do you get people to start spending money? Some countries have reduced, tax rates for both corporations and for individuals, because you're saying if your take home is 100 shillings, maybe that take home has now been reduced. So if we cut personal income taxes, it still gives you money to spend in the economy. If we cut the corporation tax rate, as an instance, for countries that have done that, it enables those corporations to retain what would have gone towards taxes, and then they are able to invest that back into the business and look at the areas where they can grow. The second aspect is looking at how to assist businesses that are in distress. And a lot of our SMEs, we have talked about the lack of reserves, the lack of forward planning for a lot of businesses. Most businesses operate on the basis of day to day. So most people did not anticipate the impact that, COVID-19 had. So government and the private sector, and together with organizations like ASITA, with UMA, need to sit together and think about what are the kind of issues that have come up from this, what are the lessons that have been learned from what has happened so far, and how do we move forward and utilize the funds that are available to be able to generate, business, to be able to generate enough money to keep the economy running. I think the third thing is then to look at how do we get people back to work. And that's not just from an employment perspective, it's for every other individual. We do have a large informal sector, which again supports the economy. And with the lockdown, even with the easing that has happened, there's still a large part of that economy that has not yet started, that has not resumed operations, for lack of a better word. So it's also looking back and saying, how do we get those people back to work so that they start to generate an income, they start to be able to look after themselves, even if it may be something small. Currently, government has been looking at supporting those who are slipping into the poverty, who are slipping into poverty. For those who have been watching the news, it was quite surprising that there were a number of people who people had never even imagined were living, let's say, below a certain, level of standard of, of income, level of income. And these people did come up and they were also asking for assistance. And the perception in the public had always been that those people are well off. That sector is, when we see people in the, who are in the, let's say, the news business, a lot of people have assumed that they have a job, they are more stable than others. But what COVID has revealed is that there is a lot of, let's call them underlying, I will borrow that term and use it. There are underlying issues and we need to resolve those issues. But it is going to take a collaboration. So it's not just, the government has to do this. As the private sector, what are the suggestions? What do you think will work? So that it's a hand-in-hand effort to move towards recovery and ultimately helping us bounce back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patronella. The bouncing back, we are all talking about a stimulus, we're talking about a recovery. We even do not know when does the recovery begin, because economies are still going down. You must first reach the bottom of the valley before you can climb out. So we don't know whether we reach the bottom of the valley in July of 2020 or July of 2021. But also remember, as Patrick Birungi put it, we are integrated. You might reach the bottom of your valley, but you need to wait for America to also reach the bottom and come out, because we are part of this and we have to leverage them. So we're really having a tight situation. We need to understand what is the budget going to be seeing. We are trying to raise questions, more questions really than answers, so that tomorrow we'll all be waiting to hear what does the minister put out there. But the minister himself, I'm sure he will be ready to say, well, I'm also watching the space. As my revenues come in, I will have the liberty to realign the budget again to address the emerging conditions. So it's kind of a dicey situation that we're going to have. We've not been there, but now we are there. We must walk out together. What is the economy going to be looking like? I want to get to some of my members on the audience, and I want to begin with you, Abu Baker. You sit in different areas in finance, in quite a number of areas. What do you see? What advice would you give to a Ugandan out there who possibly runs a business, plans to run a business, plans to restart it, or plans to close it, or has not even any business at all? He's just been living out there. You live with us. What is it that you have to tell us?
Thank you so much for that. Before I go into the business, maybe let's talk about a little bit about the budget. I saw that it has increased by 12%, so it's now 45.5 trillion instead of 40.5 last year. And then, like Dr. Muhomuza was asking earlier, whether the government can actually finance that budget. Now, from what I've heard, the G20 in April has postponed debt payments, bilateral debt payments, and interest payments that give a bit of fiscal room to the government to postpone its debt. Of course, while that gives relief, it also gives worry. It means that we've made the full circle from being forgiven our debts in the 80s to having a potentially debt stress situation. The figures are such that $11.5 billion will be due to private debtors by 2024. So you have to make the distinction that while debt has been postponed by the G20, there are private creditors. Countries have borrowed from the markets. And this is where stress could come from. The macro risk of failing to generate enough foreign exchange is very, very important. Then when you come down to the area that I would like us to, give a little bit of light because of the data, is small and medium-sized enterprises. The data for that is a bit staggering. They constitute about 80% of the private sector, produce 75% of GDP, and they employ 8.5 million people, of which that constitutes about 70 to 90% of non-farm employment. And that means if you're going to look for an area where you should focus your attention for recovery, that is an area you have to look at. In terms of composition, 50% are in the service sector, 33% in trade, and you have about 10% in manufacturing. So how do you start to move them? And just to address what Dr. Birungi was saying about shifting things around from, say, an infrastructure budget. Now, the challenge you have when you have a development corporation, how do you draw the line between what it does and what the private sector is already doing? And when it comes to infrastructure, for us you could call us street economists. We don't work for the government, or we were always arguing that when you do a large infrastructure project, I'll give very live examples. If you're taking a large road through Bulambuli, what's the point of spending $100 million and you don't spend 1 million to create a silo? Because I was driving through Bulambuli and I had to dodge the maze on the road, so I ended up driving. So if you're building a road through Karamoja and their main economics is the cow, how do you have the conscience to build 300 kilometers worth of a road for $400 million and you build no infrastructure whatsoever for milk processing or beef processing? And so for us, our challenge hasn't been that the aggressive government stance on infrastructure is extremely important, and this goes to the basic economics of Adam Smith, that the rural area is going to provide you with the raw materials. They must reach the factory, and then when the factory produces, you'll use the same road to take them back. And one of the things that the budget should do clearly is incentivize transport and logistics. Goods come from these rural areas, so the infrastructure drive of the government was the right focus with those things I was putting in place in terms of Then when it comes to stimulating certain areas like construction, I would expect the budget to have fiscal policy that encourages people to build or buy homes, where you could say that, say, mortgage payments would be deducted from before you pay tax. And so the finance minister has the leeway or the fiscal policy powers to ameliorate or reduce some of the impacts that we are seeing. So when we go to individual businesses and what they should be doing, to address you directly, the question you asked is, these are tough times where you have to, first of all, find out, the first question you ask is whether you are still relevant in this new economy. I have a friend who runs an events company, and he has already innovated because the event revenue is now zero. And so that's the first question you ask, and then you look at the resources you have available. And of course, all SMEs, including us who run smaller companies, are struggling to answer these questions. Then of course, you have to look at wasteful expenditure that you can get rid of. And then of course, go into a sales mode to reconnect with your clients. And then safety of your employees, how much safety, how much do you educate them on this in particular, and then looking for opportunities. Then again, going back to Dr. Birungi's comments about why people build arcades and malls, is that, you see, this area of Chikubo, I'm lucky because my mother was one of the founders of that area, so I have seen it come up. This is a key artery of the economy of Uganda in terms of exports. I've seen people there from DRC, Tanzania, Central African Republic, South Sudan. It's a key artery of our manufactured output. People should not always look at Chikubo as a place where they sell Chinese goods, not at all. Including some of the products that UDC is already producing, like from Soroti, they are going through Chikubo. So these arcades have come as a result of natural private sector growth and development. And so the distribution channel or wholesalers are very, very important for manufacturing. If you do not have them, it doesn't matter how much you're manufacturing. Then on the issue of globalization, the example I can give is an iPhone, where it's owned by an American company, but the screen is made in Japan, and the base and it's put together in China. And when you look at it, you have 8 components coming from 8 different countries. So commerce has been about global value chains. And so for us to survive as small businesses, we must get into global value chains, because that's where the market is more robust. And when you have situations like this, where all of a sudden in Uganda, we have challenges, are you part of the export value chain? Because that's where the risks are. And so fiscal policy and government spending and tax incentives should focus more on those value chains that can allow us to participate in global value chains. Of course, we were doing it well in tourism sector. You see how fast it had grown and how relevant it had become in terms of percentage of GDP and percentage of foreign exchange revenues. So I would still think that as SMEs and as government, the fiscal policy and incentives should look very carefully at how we join global value chain, which means exports, and that's where our biggest macroeconomic risk is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abu Baker, for bringing it home and talking about global value chains. Quite often, our talk is we want to take the value all the way. We must add value. But literally here he's saying, well, we may not make the phone, but now that we have cows around, can we make that cover which eventually holds the phone? Let the America make the phones, let every other person do the complicated stuff, but I really want to be there slaughtering my cows on the president's farm, hopefully, and then skin them and get that leather and make the casing. Is this what we are doing downtown? I want to invite you, Everest Kayondo, to really, you have been in it. You don't even have to be told what it should be. You should be telling us what it should be. And that's what we want to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Muhumuza, and thank you, panelists. Incidentally, this is quite insightful, but going by what usually we have been advocating and what we have actually put up, it is quite interesting. I'm impressed when my brother said the budget has been pushed up. The estimates are higher than the previous when everything was normal. And this is where some of us are disturbed. Are we expecting more revenue? And if more revenue is expected, where is it coming from? Is it coming from the tax? And when people are crying that let us please waive this, waive that, this is a very big question. Now, going into investment direction, which Dr. Birungi talked about, indeed, this is very necessary in the sense that as we talk about import substitution, definitely we need government intervention. And we are also disturbed that government thought that once you privatize, you just go to a beach and just wait for the taxes and the private sector does the donkey work, which can't happen. We need government intervention. We can take an example of Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been very effective. They are now doing the assembly of vehicles. They are doing a lot of manufacturing, and they are doing a lot of import substitution. And in fact, some of these Ethiopians, they insisted on going to Dubai until they found that some of the textiles they were importing from Dubai was made in Ethiopia. So this is when they had to run back to Ethiopia and said, please, why should we go to Ethiopia, sorry, to Dubai to import goods made in Ethiopia? And they became inward looking. But government intervention was key in that they started government had to give loans to manufacturers, the potential manufacturers, instead of constructing these arcades, because construction of the arcade, that amounts to withdrawal of resources, and it's a vote of no confidence from the trading sector to the non-tradables. And it becomes very big challenge because you have maybe developed, you have been trading, you have imported all this textile all along from China or from wherever. But instead of going for forward integration or backward integration, you end up withdrawing these resources by sand and brick, and then you start constructing the arcade. So we need this intervention, and it needs government commitment in terms of one, interesting those who have the capital. Number two, even giving them support in the initial stages instead of looking at taxing them even before they get started. And that is very important. And he again talked about balancing of the economy. This is what Mauritius did. For them, they just decided now we are going for the budget, but this year we are going to finance this. And they would heavily finance a particular sector until it has matured. Then this is when finally end up saying the next year, what do we do next? And this is how they have managed to export to Europe, and you will find their goods on the shelves of USA. And that was the trick. So much as we appreciate this infrastructure development, and we have allocated always over 10% of our GDP to agriculture, to manufacturing, but to construction. But at the end of the day, it has been very key in making sure that it moves. Going to agriculture, incidentally, it is employing so many, and when it comes to allocation, even when we had their Maputo commitment of, was it 15%? But they have even insisted on 3.2%, 3%, which is peanuts. And when we talk about agriculture, they are telling us they are allocating much more in infrastructure, which ends up in agriculture. But for us, our thinking is we have 20% of Uganda, which is waterborne, and this could help in irrigation infrastructure. It could help in extension services. It could also help in post-harvest losses. We don't have silos, and we can't boast of being a food basket when we insist on these natural seasons, and we just wait for the natural water. It can't happen. Incidentally, when we will make, like you, if you decide to export to Europe, when you have been contracted, these guys, they will just wait for the goods on their shelves. You don't talk about crop failure, don't talk about season failure. For them, they are just waiting for these items on their shelves, and you must know what you are exporting. And the traceability for them is very key. So these are the areas which you have to develop, because much as they might not take these other goods and we might not very much compete in manufactured goods, I can see there is an effort of constructing, maybe manufacturing or assembling vehicles. But in 1 year was Makerere assembling one bus. But so, and you can imagine the investment government was putting in the manufacture of one bus. And it becomes just ironical when Japan is, one factory is manufacturing millions of buses. And recently I was reading about when we are boasting about the manufacturing of, the extraction of oil from Uganda. And when I was reading, I was flying from Istanbul, January, coming to Uganda. And they were saying in 2022, they expect to be manufacturing, electric vehicles up to 1 million per year. And if they are running away from the demand of fuel, where are you going to sell this fuel? So we have to think very seriously and see where to invest. And related to this, again, we have continuously, for us from the tourism fraternity, we have continuously told the government, why can't you allocate more resources to tourism? Right now, the way my president talks about it, he says there is a real economy and a leisure economy. And he says leisure economy can wait and suffer. But seriously, when you look at Dr. Muhumuza, he will tell you there is a difference between primary production, secondary production, and tertiary production. Those who are there, actually, those developed countries are in tertiary production. They have run away from primary and secondary. So much as we might not jump and skip this radar, but definitely we need to put some funds where it matters. I can give you an insight. In 2017-2018 budget, we got just 0.1% allocation from the budget, and 0.1 ended up yielding 10% of the GDP and 25% of the exchange inflows. Right now, even the allocations, even last year was 0.6, and I think it's the current allocation of 0.6 in this one. And I would think if there is any sector to support and to ensure that it doesn't fail and comes back to its feet, and doesn't need even much support, just give it 1%. This 0.4% is to support these companies which are engaged in tourism, so that they retain their staff, and they don't chase them away. They retain their knowledge, and then you do a bit of marketing. This sector will come back and revamp the economy and support the economy to make sure that we move forward. Now, and these allocations, again, I think I've seen even after the coronavirus came, when we found that the parliament continued blessing the creation of more cities, said, now what is this? Are we seriously speaking the same language? Because these were in plan, which was okay. But if you insist that you are going to keep the same plan as it was in the beginning, and is now and ever shall be, it becomes a real problem. We need to reallocate and ensure that the coming of Corona, in a way, had an impact, and we are planning for the coming and the recovery of our economies. Finally, is the direct foreign investment, which is very good, and we have been boasting. Doctor, what have been telling people even when we are at different fora. We have been telling people that, yes, we are boasting of GDP growing at 6%, 5%, but why is it that Ugandans continue complaining about more poverty? It is because we have addressed ourselves more to GDP than to GNP. Ugandans are not participating in this economy. They are not actually doing well, because the sectors which are growing, we will be told telecommunication is growing. And where is telecommunication? Who owns telecommunication in Uganda? Maybe you are, but we don't have shares. This is why some guys from Thailand, when they came here to invest in Uganda, we asked them a sort of a rhetoric question. What about Ugandans going to invest in Thailand? They told us it is very all right. If you are going to invest up to $4 million, you will be allowed to own 40% of the enterprise. Meaning that Ugandans should be part of the ownership of such big enterprises, because number one, growing sector, telecommunication is growing, banking sector is growing, but of the banks which are native, the native banks, and what is their share in the entire economy, you will see that seriously they are down. Then insurance is growing, construction is growing, but again the participants in the construction is not about the construction of the arcades, it's the construction of the dams and the construction of the roads. And the participants again are foreign based. So we need to seriously think about the GNP and the participation of Ugandans in the economy. I submit, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Very insightful things. Are we part of the economy, even as it grows? Are we in there? How do we get in there? These are terminologies. We don't want to get into a conversation of GDP, of GNP, but he has simplified it. GDP would be it is growing. GNP, are you part of it? That's the GNP. And because the president now has even sent us back to school for us to be the economics, we all along knew the real economy, its opposite is the monetary economy. Now the president has said there is a real economy and the leisure or even vulnerable economy. So we are now thinking, how do we engage the president? And I want to believe the budget tomorrow will be speaking to the real economy and the vulnerable economy. So I'm trying to read ahead of things, and I'm burning midnight candles. The Adam Smith we talked about did not define things that way, neither did Keynes define them that way. But that's what the budget is going to be speaking to. So we really want to be relevant to the conversation that's going to happen tomorrow. And even before I get to Norbert Kagoro, I'll just be coming to you shortly. I really want to tease out from Julius Mukunda. He really is really around the government, asking certain questions on behalf of civil society, because civil society is your voice and my voice. Where me and you cannot reach, where the permanent secretary of finance sits, where the auditor general sits, where the speaker of parliament sits, Julius Mukunda is mandated to go there for us as civil society. There have been these issues which government itself has not shied away from, absorption of its own budgets, and which actually speak to implementation. A dam is being built, we are told it will be open in 48 months. It takes 7 years and it's still not running. There is an issue there. So we cannot just say revenues have not coming through. But even when we had the revenues, we had challenges. When you sit with government, what is the conversation there that you hear to address issues of not just absorption, but also value for money?
Thanks, Muhumuza. I think one of the biggest challenges we face in this country is around value for money. And value for money for me is, just put it into simple terms, how much does a kilometer cost? And they will tell you around 200 million. That's how they can tell you. But people will say it can cost less than that. The last time we engaged on it, we were told that, the soils in Uganda are different from other countries. Sometimes we are passing through the swamp, others are rocky, and therefore the cost cannot be the same. But it is so varying to the extent that you wonder whether actually this is the right cost. But it's just not only the roads, it's also other things. For government to deliver even simple, let's say, simple workshop like this, I mean, it will cost almost 10 times than what the private sector can be able to do. And then you ask yourself why. To be able to set up a simple factory which your private sector can set up within, 100 million. For the government, it might even cost more than 200 million. And then we begin to ask ourselves, but why is this so? It is so because the government does not have the mindset of a business person. It is so because the government knows that every year I will be getting money and putting into this factory until it runs. And for me, that's where we have a big problem. If you don't have the capacity to manage a factory, give it to somebody else who knows how to manage it. And they give you returns. Let's even talk about this hotel where we are in. Just imagine if government was in charge of this hotel where we are. I'm telling probably these shares would not even be there. And they would be having a huge budget line in the government to service this particular hotel. But now this particular hotel is not only being budgeted for in the government, but it brings money to government. So government must have a mindset of a business person in terms of getting returns. As simple as that. Let's concentrate on the goods. The other part, of course, is absorption capacity. I mean, you've talked of dams, but also there are simple things. I mean, I have told you just go on the northern bypass and see how many years it has taken for us to complete it. I have my famous road of Usega and Mpiji. The Auditor General told us last year that we paid 2.4 billion to service the interest of the loan. Not even one trench has been dug on that loan. These are the monies we pay because we contracted the loan, but we are not ready to do it. So our capacity not to begin generating that. And if you go on our records of loans, I can tell you, it's shocking how many of our loans are at zero performance. The money is there, we signed and finished, but is at zero performance because we contracted ourselves when we were not yet prepared. The absorption among agencies has improved of recent. I don't have very many issues with them, a few of them. But majorly, why most monies was returned like last year is because the government system at the Ministry of Finance is a bit stringent to the extent that now, if you have pensioners, you send their names and the money is sent to their accounts directly. The money no longer goes to the ministry, to the district, then the district gives it to an individual. Now, because there were so many ghost pensioners, now you have nobody whom you have an account to send the money to. So you say, I have 100 of them, you budget for it, but you end up only verifying like 10. So the other 90, their money still stay with the treasury, and it ends up returns back. But we need to go back to helping public investment management. I think that's our biggest challenge, Doctor, public investment management. That before you contract and get that particular loan, are you ready to start immediately? That is the one of the biggest problem we are facing. If we go to UDC right now and say, okay, how many bankable projects do you have? Then our doctor, he said, no, I have 10 of them. Just put the money on the account, I will start running. That is the kind of business you want in the government. And even in this recovery period we are talking about, if we are saying, okay, now we are going to put our money in these things, let us ensure that we have built, that the capacities are there. And the capacities are there already, but we organize that capacity and make it and focus it to deliver on that product. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are discussing about putting the budget that's coming tomorrow into context. And as we've said, it's not just the monies that the minister is going to be reading. He's going to be reading the policies. He's going to be reading the objectives that he wants to achieve through this budget. And the conversation you are hearing is, this is going to take on the implementation side. Are those people who are going to receive the money going to be able to do what that money is supposed to do? And we get the value from that money. Because that is the only thing that would guarantee to us a recovery. Otherwise, just putting money there and knowing our budgets have come and then we do different things slowly or even do the wrong things will not guarantee the recovery. and somebody here is a managing partner. How do you manage things? Mr. Kangoro, I really want you to come and give us insights. You sit in Deloitte, you deal with so many people, you advise them on managing complex and simple things. What advice do you have in the space of managing things?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good evening, viewers. A lot has been said around setting our priorities, right? A lot has been said, I think, from the people that are monitoring our budgets around discipline on our budget implementation processes. But I think there are some quick wins that we can have as we look at recovery and thriving. First and foremost, given the nature of the problem that we have, when you talk about COVID, there is a lot of uncertainty around it. So as we try to recover from it, there is need for us to rerun our risk assessment models. Because the risks that we have, both in government, both in private sector, are totally different. They have changed. You earlier mentioned that when we were planning, there are things that we planned for, and I think also the Chairman Kasita has mentioned the districts that had been planned for, that are going, rather the cities, which are continuing to happen. But the thing is, what are those risks that we have that are going to affect the way we are going to deliver on our programs, the way we are going to deliver on our businesses, that need to be reassessed? When COVID began, we all went home, we were under lockdown, we started working from home. Some of the risks that came to us were cyber risks. This is something we never planned for. Yep. And I know a number of you probably have found your mobile money balances totally different. So we are in uncertain times that are really calling for an uncertain solution, and the solutions that we come up with will help us take care of our recovery. The next thing I can think of, Mr. Moderator, is around taking care of our people. We as business leaders, this is the time to begin engaging our people. They need to begin looking at doing business differently. And the same thing can be said with government. With government, we need also to look at our civil service and see areas where civil service can become more innovative. So what does that require? Things like resetting our performance appraisals. Somebody mentioned that, the way we are implementing our budgets at times, there are things that we are delaying to take care of, like the road in question where we have paid interest and we haven't implemented that. This is the time now we need to reset our performance assessment mechanisms. I know when the president started this term, we had coined the word Chisanja Hakuna Mchezo. I think this is the real time Hakuna Mchezo needs to be more re-emphasized. Again, we need to look at our governance models. This is the time where we need quick decision making. If we are going to implement certain projects, certain programs, certain things that we need to make us recover as fast as possible, the decision-making process also needs to follow suit. We all know when COVID began sometime, I think the first case was around the end of December, 31st of December. Too fast in March, the numbers started increasing. We locked down, and that was a quick decision because it helped us set a pause and rethink how are we going to do it. We could have decided and continued to operate as business as usual, but we needed to understand what was the challenge that was before us. So I think if we clearly define what our governance models are going to look like and the way we are going to make quick decisions, that's how fast we are going to quickly return to normal. The other thing is how much time are we placing on recovery? How much time are we spending thinking about recovery? A number of businesses are preparing for response. There is a lot around business disruption. but how much time are we putting into thinking about the recovery that we need? The Chairman Kasita mentioned that this is the time for us to begin sitting down together as private sector leaders and government leaders to think about the Uganda that we desire, the Uganda that we want to participate in, and such inputs or contributions that will come from both the private and public sector will help us prepare ourselves to recovery. I submit, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Kagoro. That is from a manager's desk, a person who really helps other managers manage their things. He's told you about risks, and we're really going to be managing complex things, and I'm going to go to Patrick Birungi here. I think you could have paid for this something. Now you know that having a coffee with some of those who help others manage things is worthwhile. This is how we are going to save the monies we haven't picked. You're going to be doing things differently. Instead of writing to a lawyer and meeting him in his law firm where he invoices you, go to that old boy you had whom you've never talked to, but you are together in primary 7. He took the legal route. I don't know which other route you took, but he can give you some candid advice, resetting and reevaluating the risks. We do not know what risks we are facing. As I said, we have no idea what the vaccine will look like. Is it going to be monthly, weekly, daily, annually, or maybe 10 years? That is going to be out there. We still have a lot of investments to make in the health sector, which we haven't adequately met. We are now meeting those challenges where the health workers themselves are saying we haven't been very well facilitated. That is just 665 cases so far. Brazil the other day had almost 10,000 cases popping up in one day. We are not yet there, but we can go there. We want to open the schools. We really want these children to get back to school. How is it going to be like? What are the risks in these schools? When we built them, we just packed children to sleep there like eggs on a tray. Now, social distancing. How many children should be in a school? We are waiting for guidance. Will these schools still remain viable? Because they have only been viable paying the teachers adequately well when they are having 10,000 or 1,000 or 600 children. Now, if the new rules come and say you can only have 400, is that school still viable? These are the risks we are really having. Dr. Patrick Birungi, you have been designing some investments out there, and we really want you to invest. Because there are spaces private sector is not going to walk into, government must walk in, or even when the private sector is coming in, must come in jointly with government. But already we are beginning to hear, are the two talking the same language? Because private sector, they want to design it tomorrow and deliver it in the evening. Government sometimes we have just been talking about resources, we contracted, we're now paying interest. For them, time is there. How are you going to manage these partnerships? And the budget is going to come tomorrow. I want to believe there is something for Uganda Development Corporation. And it is Uganda Development Corporation. How are you going to develop Uganda? I want you to speak to those. How do you intend to proceed after 1st of July when the next budget begins to operate?
Thank you, Dr. Muhumuza. Two things. I want to first, we can easily talk about COVID until the cows come home. But I also want to first give hope to the public and listeners out there. There's no question about it, the economy has been hit. And that's why when Mabel was presenting and reached the growth numbers of GDP, she said the growth numbers are different. Yep. The growth numbers are different because of uncertainty. Because we are still understanding this and its actual impact. So there are projections by Ministry of Finance, there are projections by the IMF, there are projections by the economic intelligence of the economists and so on. But the common trend is that there will be a reduction in growth. What seems to be clear is that our growth will remain positive. It will not be what we expected, but there will be some growth. Projections range between maybe 3 to 3.5 growth rates in the coming, and then a recovery a year after. Now, this gives us hope. Is 3 bad? Of course it's bad. If you're expecting to grow at 7% or 6.8 and you're growing at 3, it's bad. So, but it's not really
Bad as
closing.
negative.
Yeah. So I think in the year 16-17, this economy was growing at about 3.8%. So it is bad, but there is hope, and the projections show some positive trend. Back to the question of implementation, how do we implement quickly? I guess there are 2 things which must be noted here. One is the normal government business, from my perspective as a government institution. You have to take your time, you plan, you follow the PPD Act, you do and deliver. So Julius, when he talks about Segampiji, these are some of the challenges. These are some of the challenges that government institutions have to go through. However, the second component is where we need, where we're in a war situation, like Julius said at the beginning, where we need quick action. So if we need quick action, us as CEOs also need to be more active, but also need to be protected. In the sense that I will have to go to PPDA and ask for accreditation. Okay? So if you want me to pull off a factory within 3 months, I can. But please protect me, give me accreditation, allow me to move faster, because this is a war situation and we have to help out a particular situation. Or else I will have to follow the normal procurement process. If we are procuring a tea processing line of about 6.5 billion, you are looking at maybe, if you are very fast, 4 to 5 months to do the procurement, and then you have another 5 months or so for fabricating the line. So you cannot expect it to be tomorrow. Okay? So there are some challenges here and there that we need to really address in order to implement faster. But before I've been to PPDA, and they're always willing to give that kind of accreditation. And in this situation, it should be a direct move towards supporting quick action.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to talk about is that UDC really doesn't compete with the private sector. So if the private sector is doing well, maybe there's no need for UDC to go there. I don't know which area, but take, for example, production of tiles, floor tiles. If you look at what Goodwill Tiles has done to this market, really you don't need UDC. But UDC comes in wherever there is some kind of market failure, some kind of failure of sort. For example, UDC could be planning to do a cement factory in Moroto. And you say there are so many private sector in the cement industry. But UDC comes in to fill a gap. These cement industries are importing clinker. Clinker is more than 85% cement. Okay? So UDC comes in to fill that gap and produce clinker that can supply to these other factories. So that's how UDC comes in. It doesn't come in to compete with the private sector where it's doing well. It comes in to support the private sector do their work better and more efficiently. And also swallow a bit of risk and the risk areas, the risk production systems and so on. I also wanted to note, I think the Kasita chair mentioned very good points on where market failures, where we need to UDC, for example, to come in. you find like in the construction industry, road construction to be specific, you'll find that more than 97% of that business is dominated by foreign companies. Only 3% of those resources go to Ugandan companies. Now, is this sustainable really?
No.
Is it sustainable in the current environment?
No, it's not.
Let's see who is taking these resources. I'll concentrate on Chinese companies specifically. CCC, China group this, group that. These are public enterprises in China. Okay? So if we can have public enterprises in China, why can't we have public enterprises in Uganda to use the Ugandan resources?
Nice.
So UDC can go into construction, not to compete with the private sector per se, but fill that gap because there is a particular gap that we want to fill and build local capacity in that industry. You can talk, again, you gave an example of the telecom industry. This is a very strategic sector. If you take the importance of big data alone, that the entire big data of this country is held by mainly two private companies, Airtel and MTN. And then the government institution called UTL allow it to disappear. Government shouldn't allow that to happen. So UDC can come in for strategic reasons, for security reasons, to come in and intervene and make sure that we revive that kind of media, and then we play a role in that particular sector. So in Uganda, one of the biggest challenges is actually for absorption and others is the procurement function. You want to procure something small, but you get appeals all over. Procurement that is supposed to take you 6 months takes you 2 years, takes you 1 year, because you have to go through the appeal process up to the tribunal or even to, and then at the end of it all, you are not able to deliver on time. So for us to manage our PIM, these are some of the areas we need to fix. Actually, sometime I think maybe it's okay when the president says, road X, give it to company Y. It eliminates a lot, a lot of procurement noise. It eliminates a lot of procurement noise so that you concentrate on delivery of the roads other than concentrating on delivery of the procurement. Yeah? So those are the kind of things we really need to look at. But by and large, for us, we as UDC, we are ready in particular areas, in agro-processing. And this is the whole idea. Everyone knows with cassava, you can get so many products. Maybe everything you are holding here has a cassava input in it, a pepper, a tie, a whatever, has a cassava input in it. But why is it that the private sector are not going in there? But let me tell you, within a few days or years of investment as government, the private sector will take it over. We invested in fruit processing in Soroti, and then we opened up the eyes of the private sector that there is a lot of fruits in Soroti, that our factory cannot consume even 10% of the fruits during the season. And now the private sector are already moving to establish other processing plants. That's the role of UDC. That's the role that government takes on. We are ready in a number of areas, especially agro-processing, cassava processing. We have projects ready, tea processing. We have a number of projects ready. So we can move on some of these initiatives quickly, but there are those which will definitely delay as a result of those other constraints I mentioned earlier. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I think one of the emerging conversations is you will certainly be required to rethink now that COVID has come through. Because if you're going into areas where private sector is really not working into, those areas might even increase with the advent of the risks that COVID has brought into the market and the disruptions. And yet these may be very strategic areas, as you have mentioned. So the conversation continues. As I've said, it's an uncertain world, and yet we are in it. You sometimes want to wish this was a movie, that you are only watching it from the comfort of your chair and will eventually end. This is kind of a horror movie where rocks are falling from wherever and you don't know which rock will hit you. And unfortunately, you are part of the cast. You are part of that movie as a person, and it's not just a movie, it is our reality. And we're putting the budget into perspective. We want to believe that even as the minister comes to read it tomorrow, a lot is uncertain for him, and this is part of the conversation we've had here, that even if he was given time to go back to Parliament, the uncertainty will still have remained. So we're just going to manage by going through. There's that kind of economic theory and mathematical models of how do you manage chaotic situations. And this is really what we are going to have in the upcoming budget. You're managing a chaotic situation. Because I want to believe if we woke up one morning and we have tested 2,000 people and 800 have turned positive, you wouldn't continue with the budget you had before that day.
No, you can't.
Now we are still comforted that when we test 2,000, 17, 12, 11 pop up. But if you test 2,800 turn up, you can't go business as usual. This is how we are going to walk into the next year. This is how we are going to walk into that budget. And two critical things in that budget is tax revenues. Now I know where to hold Patronella from. It's going to be on tax. And talking about tax, there are two entities, the tax collector and the taxpayer. Maybe you have some advice for both. What would you say if you were looking at the tax revenue entity, Uganda Revenue Authority? What would you say to me who is paying tax? And I'm really trying as much as possible not to pay those taxes. By the way, there is hope in this economy. Every time I see the traffic jams, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, people still had some money to bring out their cars and drive them. Because you know there are petrol stations who are saying 95% of my customers have gone away. Now when I see these vehicles back in town, it means those petrol stations are working, those girls and boys are working,
Yes.
but also we are capturing some tax revenues,
Yes.
which we are not picking in March, which we are not picking in April. So it is possible to revamp this economy, and as I've said, and reverse the trend, but we need to be doing things. Patronella, where you sit, what should we be doing as taxman and woman, and me the taxpayer? I don't know whether man or woman as a taxpayer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhumuza. At the start of this discussion, you had indicated that these days the budget is no longer a secret. We know what is coming, you know, more or less before actual budget reading. And tax policy is no different. The Uganda Revenue Authority has published measures that it has been, you know, in a bid to assist taxpayers manage the impact of COVID. Government has proposed, and if for those who listened to the President's State of the Nation address last week, there were measures that were proposed that related to tax policy. Having said that, I think if I start off from a government overall perspective, I think it's important to consider, and it also leads into the discussion we've just been having, what are the key sectors that government needs to look at, and therefore how can it also tailor tax policy to assist those sectors. So if we are looking at it from the point of, let's say, what are the biggest contributors to GDP? And therefore these contributors have been affected by, you know, the impact of COVID, and it's going to take a while before they recover. What fiscal measures can be put in place to enable these businesses survive? I think that's a critical part, because a lot of them are struggling. So we are not even talking about, you know, I am operating, and a lot of those businesses may probably have closed or are close to, you know, closing. So how does business support, how does government support those businesses to survive and then continue operating and ultimately, you know, contribute to revenue collection, so to speak? And it's to, the way to think about it as well is you may lose something now, but ultimately, what is the gain overall? As a country, what are we moving towards? We want to get to a point where we can support, where tax revenues can probably support the government spending. Currently, government domestic revenue mobilization is about let's say 50%. So we are heavily relying on debt to support some of our expenditures. So what do you do now in order to set the tone for the future? So probably look at biggest contributors to the GDP. The other thing, and working together with Uganda Revenue Authority, who are some of your biggest taxpayers? And that's not necessarily always, the businesses as we know them, the big businesses. But who are your taxpayers? What kind of your biggest taxpayers? And what kind of challenges are they facing during this time? What are the kind of things that can be done during this time to support them and get them to the point where they get back to being the top taxpayers? URA has had a program of relationship managers. When I started, practicing in this area, the relationship manager that a taxpayer had was a very vital person, because that meant this is a person you went to who understood your business and knew at particular points in time what you were facing. And therefore, there was room to discuss. For a number of taxpayers right now, the general sense is that URA is a lot harder and there's no room for discussion. In this period, there have been moments where, taxpayers are receiving assessments. You're in lockdown, so you don't have the capacity even to respond to some of the assessments that have been raised, because you don't necessarily have access to maybe an email. Sometimes we think of these things very simply. We assume everyone has an email to which things get sent. Everyone has access to the internet, stable internet, and therefore on a day-to-day basis is aware of what is going on. That is not necessarily the case. So I think from a URA perspective, they need to go back to, the taxpayer is a partner. We are partners in this. If the taxpayer is not making money, that means as URA, we are not also going to collect the revenues we need to collect. My expectation, from a URA perspective, is going to be that going forward there will be, stress on compliance. They're probably going to look more at arrears. There are taxpayers they have assessed in the past who have tax to pay, and they're probably trying to collect that money. But it still goes back to, if I don't have the money to pay tax now, so I can't pay as you earn, for the next month, what is the chance, the likelihood that I am able to find money to pay, back taxes that I owe? So I think it has to be a concerted effort by both, from the URA side and the taxpayer, so that people are talking, and the URA is not as hard on businesses, knowing the situation that businesses are in taking that forward. Again, like a lot of the speakers have mentioned, this is a fluid situation. Things are changing. And I think, tax policy as well has to be fluid enough to match the changing situation, so that, everyone is par. So it's level with what is happening. I think from then a taxpayer perspective, I think for taxpayers, everyone is trying. Taxpayers are the businesses, are the people who are employed. Everyone, in all honesty, is trying to work. People want to work. So I think it's a question of, and a lot of the taxpayers are thinking, how do I innovate to stay relevant? So maybe for the taxpayers is a change in mindset, that things may not be the way they were pre-COVID, that they need to be maybe more innovative in their business. They need to think about, digital solutions. We saw that during the lockdown, supermarkets started they created websites, or they had ways you could contact them, and then they use a border and deliver things to you. So businesses already need to start thinking about new ways of working. COVID has revealed, I think, in a way, the shortcomings we have, or the issues, some of the underlying things that we need to fix And it's to learn from what has happened during this time and see how we move that forward. So that would be my...
Thank you very much. Insightful advice to the taxpayer, insightful advice to the tax collector, that the situation we are in is going to require a conversation. We are going to have problems if we take the enforcement route, but we must know that even as we are conversing, there are those who really need some kind of enforcement, a little bit of it, but that should not be the first thing to pull out. This could also be the time to begin thinking of, is there a debt we cannot collect now that COVID has come? Don't chase things that can't be discovered, that can't be really collected. You look at this company, it owed government some 200 billion or even 2 billion or even 20 million in March. Now even if you ask them to pay 1 million, they can't pay it. So it's going to be a conversation, and I think the word you have reiterated, brought on table, is relationship managers, somebody who really understands your business. Even government itself may benefit from the G20 to waive off debt payment for a while, but we know G20 does not control all the lenders we have. There are those who will say, who is G20? Just pay me my money. So there's a 4 trillion in interest that we still have to pay as government. So it's going to be a conversation really going on, and this conversation we are taking is putting the budget to be ready tomorrow in perspective. And we're trying to avoid the numbers, because the numbers will come through the budget. We're trying to avoid specifics that the Honorable Minister will be reading, but we're putting them into perspective of what is the expectation. What is in it even after it has been read? The dangers you are going to hear, things of procurement, things of do we still get value for money? Disruption of global value chains. There are things in that budget that will require India to be functioning, Dubai to be functioning for this budget to help us come out of the recovery. This is the conversation we are having, and sponsored by CSBAG. CSBAG is Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. Deloitte has given content to this conversation and to this discussion, and I'm enjoying, I'm learning. One of the things, as I said, I am learning, real economy, the vulnerable or the leisure economy. The president has literally distorted our economics and sent us back into the books world. As we come to the close, and by the way, we apologize we started late, but we're not going to cheat you because we have added some few minutes that we're going to add, and we're going into a wrap-up kind of close. Everest, what is it? You've had the conversation. I know URA comes to your people. What are you telling your people? To hide? To run? Get sticks? It's a conversation time. Are they ready to have that conversation? I want to believe the boys and girls at URA are watching. When they come to a conversation, are your people ready to do a conversation? Are they going to bring out book number 3 and hide book number 1, which is the reality?
Yeah, thank you very much, Doctor. It's literally when you talk about a conversation, this is the best thing to do. And getting it from all those who have submitted, I think they have told us, and what is expressed in all this conversation is that this is a moving target. And once you are hitting a moving target, you have to adjust each time you are aiming. So this is a conversation which must continue. Previous challenges which we had, as my sister put it, that we had relationship managers, and that was very good. However, when URA insisted on hitting the target much more than getting a conversation, even way before coronavirus came, that is where we lost it. That URA was more insisting on hitting the target, missing the target, failing to hit the target. And at the end of the day, as you are talking with your relationship manager, he's studying more of how he can get more from you and drain everything that still remains than, so you start hiding much more information. So this one is no longer a relationship manager, but more of a spy. So, so this, I think this is the spirit which we have to change. And finally, once we get it, we shall talk. Most importantly, as you said, this shouldn't be, we are not talking about figures, but at least we should know that even the Minister of Finance should be realistic, that seriously the preliminary figures were got and accumulated before COVID came in. And they insisted on those figures. But finally, we shall need to go back to the drawing board. That is my submission.
Thank you very much, and I want to believe government is listening, but also government knows. COVID came before they presented these figures. Already the growth has been revised downwards. That alone speaks to revenue collection, because revenue is a function of how the economy is performing. And we have already seen those realities, so we want to believe that government will be revising these figures downwards, but also the attitude of saying it's not just about collecting the taxes, we want them to survive. I think that's the message from Patron. How do we hold them? We're all in a recovery. You don't ask so much from a patient in Uganda. They have a proverb that don't go asking for life from a dead body. Now, thank God we don't have dead bodies. A few companies are struggling. We don't want them to die. Uganda has no COVID dead person. And I want to believe whichever business is out there is still having some breath in it. Salons may still be closed. Hotels may still be closed. How do we revive them and work out there? This is going to be the conversation. We'll be looking forward in the minister's speech. But also, as we've said, the minister himself will be revising this as and when evidence comes on table, coming out of these conversations, coming out of these discussions. Dr. Patrick Birungi, what is your parting shot? These things don't last that long. You would wish they did, but we must part. There is jam out there, as I said. The economy is active. People have come out, I don't know from where to do what, but I'm happy to see them, because that means we are collecting some taxes out of fuel.
I think one is reading from the State of the Nation address. 3 things are going to happen. One, we shall have some policy and regulatory changes. We'll see something happening in the tax arena to ease the businesses to work. We'll also see easing of regulation like in the financial sector, so that we can allow that to happen. 2, what will happen in the budget is we will see government trying to support more small and medium enterprises through availability of credit, supporting UDB in particular to play a role in this area. And thirdly, we will see government also coming in to support other enterprises through UDC and playing a more serious role. So that's my expectation tomorrow. But by way of parting, from what we've learned from the impact of COVID-19 on the economy, it's high time we started producing our own goods. It's high time we started adding value to our basic raw materials. It's high time we started playing a key role in our economy, whether it's construction, whether it's telecom, whether it's banking. We should be there, and therefore it's high time we stop importing Irish potatoes for KFC in Uganda. We should be able to at least produce Irish potatoes for KFC to operate other than importing. I thank you.
Interesting, interesting, Sammy, interesting things. One of my ministers used to say, never lose, make loss of a good crisis.
Yes.
Every time a crisis comes,
Yeah.
it's time to reinvent yourself. This has come, how best do we reinvent ourselves? We can't let this crisis walk away from us and leave us without good memories, without good projections on how do we go forward. Patronella, what is, in 1 minute, what is your last message to our viewers out there?
Okay. Mine is my hope for the budget, and even as we go along, is hopefully coming out with the money that we do have or that we hope to generate being put in the areas where it will make the most impact. Then things related to financial discipline. So just policies around ensuring that there is financial discipline within the public sector. And lastly, technology. I know we haven't really discussed this a bit in detail, but I think it's for both the government and also the private sector to explore how they can utilize technology in the current situation and make it work for them. That is my parting.
Very interesting. Technology is with us. It's not going anywhere. We can leverage it. We can actually even move faster. The fourth industrial revolution is about leveraging the technologies. Julius Mukunda, you have the last word. The time has run really short and too fast. But you have the last word. Your last 3 minutes start now.
Okay. And on three things. One is government needs to listen. I mean, because the revival of this country is not just government. The revival of this country is government and its people, and the people first. If we don't do that, I can tell you, we shall still come back and sing the same song that we want to recover. And right now, I'm ready to begin to see some sign of listening. Everybody's talking about UDB. I used to talk about SMEs, supporting SMEs. We are talking about UDC. I don't know how my brother, how much they have given him, giving small loans to through the micro support center. Now we have a new word called the myoga. I didn't know about it. I had to go to somebody to come and tell me what a myoga is all about. I think that's good listening. So let them listen more. But in listening also, they should be able to say that despite loving these projects so much at our heart, we can still drop them. That we wanted cities, we can't have them. We want so many sub-counties and town councils, we can't have them now. That we wanted to purchase hose for our people, we can't have them this time. So those are things that we need to leave out. The second one is, we are talking about import substitution. It's high time also have a strategy for bubu. If we want really to talk about a mondi, that is my very good subject, importing a mondi from Egypt. Here in Kampala, yet my Bachiga people and the guys in Mbale are doing the same to ensure that we get mondi, the real one that KFC want. What does it take for us to do that? Where is the narrow in this? Are we finding it adequately to help us do that? So it's not only narrow, but it's also other sectors that can help us be able to implement the book properly. Lastly is hope, and I think he talked about it well. I've known Ugandans to be very resilient. I've known Ugandans to be very hardworking, and I know we'll get out of this. But we want our government also to support us to get out of this by ensuring that they are not spending extravagantly, so that the little money that is being collected is where we can all benefit. I thank you.
Thank you very much, my panelists. We hope you have picked something out of this conversation that we have had. What must we put aside? Elections are coming, cities are coming, the vulnerable are still with us. We are being threatened. Some 4 million people may slip back into poverty. The budget is going to be read. The revenues are not going to come as we expected them. So it's really a very dicey situation. How can we have a conversation as Ugandans? Because Uganda, for it, whether with us or without us, is going to continue. There's going to be a country called Uganda in 2080. I will not be there, certainly. I don't know who will be there, but whoever will be there will appreciate that when this virus came in 2019, us who were here took the right decisions. Because remember, this virus came 100 years after another one had come and shaken the world. So can we leave the best legacy? Can we leave the best decisions? The conversation is going to continue. It's at personal level, it's at national level, it's at corporate level. Please find that person who adds value, and please avoid theories of conspiracy. Some people are already saying that even when the vaccine comes, please don't take it. It's about China trying to mark us, it's about this. But even as we say so many things, anxiety, we know, you are out there, some of you, this is your business. But please listen in tomorrow carefully as the minister reads that budget. Remember, you want to talk to government. Government is ready to listen to what you say to them and amend as we go forward. We don't know the future, but the future must be part of us and we must be part of it. I want to thank you very much, CS Bag, for sponsoring this discussion. I want to thank you, Deloitte, for putting content to this. I want to appreciate Dr. Patrick Birungi for leaving your desk at this very critical time to come and share with Ugandans what is going on. I want to thank you, Mr. Kagoro, for coming in this conversation. Abu Baker, thank you very much. my friend Everest, thank you very much for coming in this conversation and giving it the value that we really wanted to have to it. Mabel, thank you for those opening remarks. And for you out there in your sitting room, I know some of you may be stuck in the jam. Technology now allows you to watch before you even get to home. We want to appreciate this is NTV, and we're handing you back. They call it the command post, the center, the coordination unit. I have no idea. But it's those guys who know what technology does. Thank you very much. We appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank you.